Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today we are going to be talking about uh, a little bit of a less fun issue that the league appears to be having. The NBA has had to deal with a lot of sort of disciplinary, legal, public relations type issues quite a lot in recent memory, which leads to obviously the question in the title of this video: does the NBA have a behavior or a behavioral problem? So, right off the bat, I will say yes, they do, but maybe not quite in the way you would think, or maybe not just in the way that you would think. So, the answer yes sort of boils down to two parts here for the NBA. They have a very clear issue with the behavior of their players, coaches, owners, front office managers, etc., people of that nature. But the second part of the behavior problem here for the league is how the league responds to a lot of these incidents. So it's the behavior of the players, the coaches, the offenders in this instance, but it's also the behavior in response from the authority, in this case being the NBA itself. So, in case you're wondering where I'm coming from with all of this stuff, we'll just run through some of the recent incidences here in terms of players getting themselves, their teams, or the league itself into some hot water. Obviously, the catalyst for this video is the current situation with Kevin Porter Jr., arrested for assault, strangulation, and maybe a domestic violence charge coming as well. There have now been follow-up stories for Kevin Porter Jr. as well, where he has had other incidents of um, pretty much unacceptable behavior. I think even a former arrest earlier in his career as well. So a lot of information coming out there. Just last year, we had James Bouknight and Devonte Graham both being arrested for driving within or under, I don't know which acronym they use anymore, but driving within the influence last year in separate instances. They weren't together when they were arrested separately, right? So we've had issues there. We obviously have the Miles Bridges fiasco last season with his domestic violence charges, keeping him out of the league for a year. And going back a little bit further, the incident with Josh Primo, where the Spurs basically dropped him and his career ended over sexual misconduct. So, just in the past couple of years, lots of incidences where players have gotten on the wrong side of the law. Expanding on that a little bit, we even have issues with um, maybe a little bit less in the way of criminal liability, but still scenarios that have put the league in a somewhat bad light, right? The first thing that's got to come to mind is the current Ja Morant suspension. Um, he was basically given a very light sentence, effectively a slap on the wrist initially, and then it got bumped up to a 25-game suspension that he has still yet to serve because he basically did it again immediately afterwards. So, that's kind of the biggest one with repercussions that we still haven't fully felt yet. Um, Going further, we had Kyrie Irving promoting what really truly sort of appeared to be borderline, if not flat out, sort of anti-Semitic media, a documentary or movie, some such, a couple years back that he caught a lot of heat for because, yeah, that's kind of a borderline issue for sure. And then in this last offseason as well, we've had the Zion Williamson saga with all sorts of sordid news about his relationship issues. That has been followed up almost immediately by financial accusations. I think we mentioned it earlier in the offseason in a video I did on Zion and some of the problems that are going on around him. So obviously none of these run into legal concerns. No crimes were committed, but they were still significant news stories that put the NBA in a tough spot. And it's not just players in this circumstance, right? We've sort of limited it to players so far, but we've had owners and front office members sort of hit with the same sort of accusations, or systemic ones, as a matter of fact, over the past couple of years, right? The former Suns owner, Robert Sarver, was found to have made and been making racist, sexist comments, along with engaging in, I guess we'll politely call, inappropriate and or discriminatory behavior. Part of the reason why he sold the team, he was very much encouraged to do so after that investigation sort of turned up a lot of his wrongdoing. Recently, the situation with Ime Udoka as well, where he was kind of booted out of Boston for what was called an inappropriate relationship. And depending on how deep you went down the rabbit hole, obviously you know a little bit more about that situation, but publicly they didn't really say too much more beyond that point. But he ended up out in Boston and had to move elsewhere. And then, of course, in 2018, the Dallas Mavericks had a massive scenario here. It was something along the lines of 200 current and former employees who were charged with varying forms of discrimination and harassment. And the owner himself, Mark Cuban, was pulled into it because the claim was that he was aware that all of this had been happening and didn't really do anything to stop it. So it's not just players, it's not just coaches, it's a system sort of going up and down the league here. And when you lay it out like that, you start to understand now why the league has a problem and why it's kind of hard to argue against that, because this is going on at basically all levels, from, like I said, the guy on the end of the bench to the guy who's writing the checks and owns these franchises. So it's an issue for the NBA. But that moves us along to, frankly, an irrelevant question, but I do have to ask it anyway just to dunk on it later. And that question is, are these types of events actually happening more frequently than they were in the past? Is the reason why we are hearing so much more about behavioral issues because they are happening more often? We don't have any way of knowing that, right? We don't have any way of knowing whether the rate at which these incidents are occurring is any lower or higher than it has been in the past, mostly because we don't know how many of the incidents we're seeing now are all the ones that have happened or simply all the ones that have been reported and that we know about. And by extension, we don't know that for past eras as well. We have no idea if the scandals or issues we heard about in the past were the only ones or just the ones that came to light. It could very well be that these incidents are occurring at the same rate or even a lower rate than they were in the past, which, if that last part is true, then wow, that's not a great situation either, but whatever. The point is, the answer to the question doesn't matter. I said at the top of this section that it was a completely irrelevant question, and that's still true. It doesn't matter whether these events are happening more often, less often, same rate, whatever. At a certain point, that stops mattering. Most of these situations that are occurring are ones that can, and in most cases should, be avoidable simply by people not doing things that are kind of dumb, kind of stupid, kind of greedy, kind of terrible, right? I mean, you don't need to be a saint to not do some of the things that some of these players and coaches and managers and owners have done. However, the league itself is not really making these scenarios any easier to deal with by using systems and processes that are frankly lagging behind the times, right? And that's where we sort of get into the main issue. The player behavior is one thing, and like I said, that's been going on for a while. Who cares if it's more or less frequent, but we know players have gotten in trouble in the past. But for the NBA, they need to sort of take a step back and look at the optics of every single one of these scenarios. First and foremost, the NBA fan base, the NBA audience, is orders of magnitude bigger today than it was in the past. There's very little you can do to argue against that. News about the league or its players or its coaches or anyone can reach a far, far wider audience in a fraction of the time that it took previously. We do not have to worry about print media as the primary source. We don't even really have to care about television media as the primary source. With the internet, with Twitter or X or whatever the hell they want to call themselves now, that information is going at just light speed compared to previous forms of media. And that leads into the second sort of point here. Fans and players have effectively 24/7 access to each other via social media and a sports media machine that has been custom built over the last few decades to pump out a constant stream of news, of opinions, of rumors, of hot takes over and over and over again at any moment, at any time, on any day. You can find some sort of discussion about the NBA, about its players, its coaches, its teams, its management, its owners. And I should know, because that's basically what this entire channel is a perfect example of that. At any point, you could just sort of hop onto YouTube or Twitter and find someone talking about something relevant to what's going on right now in the NBA. And the fact of the matter is, as of right now, that won't go away. Players will not give up their ability to post to their own personal social medias or stream on YouTube or Twitch or Instagram live streams, anything like that. The players will not give that up. The fans will not give that up. They like that extension of their fandom. They like that sort of parasocial aspect where they get to interact and feel closer to their favorite players, or in some cases their least favorite players, because they're just going on there to rag on somebody. But the fact of the matter is, social media allows them to have a connection with these players that did not exist before, and they're not going to give that up on either side of the equation, neither the players nor the fans. The problem is, the league can't keep up with that. The league sort of is lagging behind the social media age because it's just nearly instantaneous. Right? Take the current situation with Kevin Porter Jr. as an example. In the time since the announcement of his arrest, which is now a handful of days, 2, 3, 4, something like that, information has flooded its way onto the internet, right? We've gotten incident reports. We've gotten police statements in the aftermath of the arrest. We've gotten hospital and injury records for the victim. And now we've got people coming out of the woodwork to talk about previous instances of bad behaviors from people who know or knew Porter Jr., from teammates, current and former, all sorts of stories sort of coming out here about times where in the past he's done something similar. As I mentioned, he already had a previous arrest as well, so that part was just straight up publicly knowable. But behind the scenes stories sort of coming out here as well, but being aired in a forum in terms of the internet where everyone can publicly view it. Anyone with an internet connection can go now and see this mountain of information that has emerged regarding the Kevin Porter Jr. situation. And if you're looking at all of that stuff, it is unbelievably difficult not to form an opinion one way or another. That much information is going to lead most people to draw a conclusion. So that brings us to point 2 here, right? Point 2 was not just the behavior of the players, but the behavior of the league in response. Because the NBA at a certain point here has lost the ability to get out in front of these situations. They have lost the ability to appear proactive in these circumstances. And that creates risky scenarios for the league itself. Going back to the Kevin Porter Jr. example, at this point, there is nothing that the league can do that will not be tainted by public opinion. There's nothing that they can do in terms of disciplinary action that won't seem reactive to public sentiment instead of guiding that public sentiment. Because the NBA's process of investigation simply can't keep up with 500,000 people tweeting at the same time. No organization could. That would be insane. So their investigative process can't keep up with just the nonstop flood of information from Twitter and local news and various portions of the internet. So if the league is going to be seen as being reactive right? By public perception, at least, even if that's not technically objectively true. Um, if the league's enforcement of rules or punishments for breaking them are perceived to be dependent on public sentiment, then some bad actors, some guys in the NBA who maybe are trying to cause trouble or don't care if they do, may be inclined to push the limits of what they can get away with the intention of leveraging that same public opinion onto their side if the league pushes back. So, in other words, handling things quote unquote internally is fast becoming an impossibility for the league. They simply cannot have a monopoly on all of the relevant facts. Their investigative process cannot be kept quiet because they're dealing with things outside of the league's purview. They're dealing with financial and legal and internet celebrity adjacent issues here, and information is getting to the public via channels that the league does not control. So if the league is seemingly losing ground to social media and the like, right? The news cycles that we have today, then where should its focus be in terms of rule enforcement and or disciplinary action? That is an almost impossible question to answer, at least from my perspective or the perspective of anyone watching this, unless you are Adam Silver, in which case, hello, Commissioner. I don't envy you. You've got a tough position here, but I can tell you where I think it should be a good idea to go, right? I mean, if this behavior is still happening and you're not going to be able to take away the cell phone of every single player the second they walk into a facility, you would think that determined would probably be your best option here, to put in place punishments and sort of consequences that would convince the vast majority of players not to do these things anymore, to not come down leniently in situations like the John Morant one, for example, where he did something that the league took exception to. They were light on his punishment, and so he didn't really feel like the consequences were that severe, and he ended up doing pretty much the exact same thing a second time. Then you had to come in with a harsher punishment. Maybe that harsher punishment should have been not quite the starting point from the beginning, but should have leaned more towards something along the lines of the 25 game suspension, as opposed to the 48 hours or whatever where he checked into rehab and then checked back out and went to go play basketball games the second the league said he was clear. I think that's it, but that's too simple of a solution. You can't just say the league needs to be tougher, the league needs to have harsher punishments, because in some instances the league simply can't do that, right? There's instances, there's rules in the NBA, there's rules in the CBA that dictate the severity of penalties, but something needs to be done, because the league has a twofold behavioral problem. As I said, the players are doing things that puts the NBA in a bad light. The coaches, the owners, the management are getting in trouble. And the league not only has to deal with the negative PR of what is done by those people, but then the double whammy effect of an investigative and disciplinary process that simply can't keep up with modern times, with the internet age, with the age of social media. So something's got to change. Something's got to be overhauled, or we just got to get used to scenarios like this playing out over and over again. In fairness, the NBA still makes a ton of money. The NFL still makes a ton of money. Going across the pond, Premier League football, right, still makes a ton of money, and they deal with these scandals as they come. They take the PR hits when they happen, and the machine just keeps chugging along and printing money. So is that an incredibly cynical and immoral way of looking at it? Yeah, probably. But you know, that is the nature of the business here. It might be a situation where the league and the players and teams simply decide that nothing needs to be done and that they'll just sort of take the PR hits as they come. I really hope that that's not the case, because that's kind of depressing, but there it is. There is a behavior issue in the NBA. I don't know entirely how to fix it. That's not my job. If the NBA wants to pay me to have some ideas, I'll throw some darts at a board, but other than that, it's up to people much smarter than me to try and figure that stuff out. But those are my thoughts on that. I just wanted to get something out there because we just have so many of these incidents happening over and over again, and I felt like I was going crazy hearing about all of it. But let me know what you think. I know this is maybe a little bit of a controversial sort of hot topic here, but I think it is important because the reputation around the game is often just as important as the product itself. And some people may not care the way the direction's going. Some people may be okay with it, some people may not, but I want to hear maybe both sides of that argument. But that is all I've got. Again, sorry for kind of a bit of a heavy topic here after nothing for a week, but I promise the next video will be a little bit lighter. We'll do something maybe less depressing. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.